Welcome everyone. I see a lot of people switching from the waiting room into our live meeting here. So I'm going to give everyone just a moment to hop on, and then I'll go ahead and get started. Just another couple seconds. All right, perfect. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar where we're going to be talking about saving for college and retirement along with some of your other family goals. My name is Sarah Krapek and I'm the Director of Participant Education with Strategic Retirement Partners. I'm going to be the moderator today, and before we get started, just a couple quick notes about how to best participate in today's event. You've probably noticed that all participants are muted, but we will welcome your questions via the raise hand feature. So if you use that at some point during the webinar, I will have the opportunity to call on you. We'll save all questions for the Q&A portion at the end as to not interrupt Zach's comments throughout the webinar. I am so pleased to introduce my colleague today, Zach Morris, who is coming to us from Rhode Island. Zach is a dedicated member of Team SRP, specifically as it relates to helping individuals, whether they're saving for retirement in one of our retirement plans or working on their individual wealth management goals. Zach, we're so thankful that you've joined us today to talk about family savings plans. So with that said, take it away, Zach.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for your time and attendance today. We are here to discuss how to best save for college and retirement. And consequently, saving for college and saving for a child has never been more challenging. And I say that with a recent Fidelity study that was conducted in mind. And they concluded that, brace yourselves, raising a child on average costs $233,000. And that is without college costs included. So over the next 30 minutes, we are going to review different strategies. We're going to talk about different tactics that we can implement. And then also those other accounts that are available that we can use as tools in our arsenal to help us combat these challenges and ultimately save for our goals. So here's the agenda. In the first half of the presentation, we are going to review primarily how to best prioritize your goals. And let's say retirement is your most prevalent goal. We are going to discuss how to best save for retirement and then look at a budgeting technique that will ultimately keep you on track and help you strive for where you want to be in your financial lives. In the second half of the presentation, that's where we're really going to take a deep dive into college planning and current trends that have made college planning so difficult, and then how can I best plan for the future. So like I mentioned, those particular accounts that are available to meet your college savings goals, and that will be primarily 529 plans, educational plans. You do also have Coverdales, but those are being phased out by 529 plans. And then you also have UTMA or UGMAs. Those are your custodial accounts, all right? And lastly in the presentation, we're going to talk about how financial wellness and being financially stable fits into everything. So before we move on, I really want to highlight this because before you ever decide to save for a child, you have to be well on your way to financial stability. I know that might be hard to hear as parents because you really want to put your needs in the back seat to your child's, but in terms of best practices for your finances, the best course of action is to make sure that you are stable before you ever try to get your child there. It'll just be that much harder for them. All right, so let's first take a look at what are some goals that you and me might have. And since we have multiple goals we're trying to save for at one time, it might feel like they are competing with each other at moments. So how do we prioritize best between these multiple goals and save for these all at one time? Well, first of all, you prioritize by your time frame. That is the easiest way and most efficient way to save and prioritize for your goals. If you notice here, you see your short-term goals, your long-term and intermediary term goals, and then retirement is on its own. And that was done purposely because retirement is different for everyone. And you are always trying to save for retirement, right, while also saving for these other goals, okay? And if you don't have a proactive plan to save for all of these at once, it's going to be that much harder, and they will feel like they are competing. So hypothetically, at the end of the month, right, when you paid all your bills and now you have maybe some discretionary income and left over, now you'll have to make a choice, right? If, let's say, your short-term goal is to pay down some credit card debt or establish an emergency fund, you then have to decide, okay, which one do I want to pay down, or which goal do I want to accomplish first? And that is not the most efficient way to handle your finances. So before we get into this a little more, I want to touch upon retirement, because retirement, and I'll be remiss, and SRP, we are your primary retirement plan advisors if I did not discuss how to best save for retirement. So if you notice here, at least save up to your employer match, 10% of your income. That should be a little bit more towards 15%. That would be a target. And then if you're over 50, you can contribute $6,500 as a catch-up. So let's talk about retirement a little bit more and how I can best prioritize my retirement savings if that is my most pertinent goal right now. Again, dictated by that time frame. So if you notice here, this is what we call, and I call, the retirement savings priorities hierarchy. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, but you can also think of this as a pyramid, right? So a pyramid, the foundation of every pyramid and every sound financial plan starts at the bottom. And if you don't have a sound foundation or construct, it's going to be that much harder to save for retirement. And number one here is have an emergency reserve. That should be 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. Now, in light of the recent pandemic, it has actually emphasized this fact that this is an issue for most Americans. Before the pandemic, the stat was around 60% of people did not have even $1,000 saved in an emergency fund. So that's scary. And now it's jumped more towards around 70+% because of the pandemic and the uncertainty around the market right now. And that has made this issue way more of an issue and really amplified it. So the very foundation of every financial plan will start with an emergency fund. And again, that's 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. Now, if we move up the hierarchy, you see number 2 is a health savings account, an HSA, if you are eligible. And you will become eligible if you have a high deductible plan. Now, personally, I would switch these, number 2 and number 3, just because number 3 is a defined contribution savings to maximize your employer match. Now, that's simply just how much am I contributing to my plan? And if my employer is nice enough to offer a match, you should absolutely save up to that match. Now, that alone might not get you there fully. Again, that target for your savings for retirement should be 15%, but that is at least a start. And if you want to implement another strategy to get to your 15%, there's something called auto increase. Now, you can increase 1% each year or Anytime you get a raise, you can increase that 1 or 2 or 3%, whatever that raise may be. But you are now getting, right, the same paycheck, but you're actually contributing that much more towards your retirement goal. So I would switch number 2 and 3 just because there is no such thing in economics as a free lunch, they say. But in this case, this is the exception. You are getting free money and you don't want to leave that free money on the table from your employer. So that is where I would put number 2, and then switch number 2 and 3 because health insurance, though, when you reach retirement, that will, of course, be a higher expense for you. So that's why it's initially put at number 2, because you know you're going to most likely pay for more medical expenses in retirement down the road than you currently do today. So that's healthcare, that's your emergency fund, and contributing at least to your employer match. And if you scroll up and continue to move up here in the hierarchy in the pyramid, you actually see number 4. And right before I mentioned financial wellness and being financially stable, you know, that fits into everything. So that says additional payments of your high interest loans. Now, if you have credit card debt or student loan debt and anything over, if you see there, 6%, you know, that's just going to hurt you so much more if you don't look to have an aggressive strategy to pay that down. Because now the limited dollars that you have from your paycheck is being allocated towards something that is not necessarily a goal, it's a burden. So you want to really make sure that you are financially stable and have a foolproof plan to pay down these debts so that you can save for retirement if that's your goal. And then lastly, if you move up this chart here, there's IRAs and taxable accounts. If you are lucky enough to max out your 401k or retirement plan at $19,500, then you can also put an additional some additional assets into an IRA or your taxable account. All right, so enough retirement. Let's talk about the fun stuff. And when I'm referring to the fun stuff, refer to having prioritized goals and creating a proactive plan to get you to where you actually want to be. So this is your plan. It's a very simple plan. So now that we have prioritized goals, right, dictated by our time frame, now we need to have a plan set up. And every plan starts in the same spot. And this is what it looks like. So you have to create a budget. Now, creating a budget is synonymous to calculating your monthly expenses. So that just means know where your money goes. Some people, a lot of people, just ignore it and put things on auto pay, and that's all well and good. But the problem is you really don't know what you're spending your money on unless you download your bank statements and look through it with a fine-tooth comb and understand, okay, I might be paying more for dining out or online shopping than I realized, and I can reallocate some of these dollars to my goals that I really want to save for. And then reduce your debt. Now people say, Zach, I don't have any debt. And if you're lucky enough to not have any debt, then that's wonderful. But this is also synonymous to reducing your careless or your frivolous spending, is what I call it. So like I mentioned before, if you dig through your statements and understand, well, wow, I spent a lot on Grubhub, or I spent a lot on online shopping, or whatever it may be, you have to have a solid plan to cut out that frivolous spending or that reckless spending. All right. And then ultimately, you're going to save more money once you do that. So that's self-explanatory. But here's the thing with saving money. If you try to do it at the end of the month after you've paid all of your bills, you then have to choose, like I mentioned, between certain goals. So how do I prioritize and how do I pay myself first? Well, the answer is make it automatic, okay? So once you make it automatic, it's now getting allocated appropriately towards your financial goals before anyone else can touch it. Okay, so here's a quick example, and I wanted to run this by you because, like we mentioned, there are multiple goals that you're saving for at once. So your emergency fund, let's say you did not have one. You can actually make it automatic, contact your payroll provider, your HR department, or go into Workday or whatever software that they use, and input your bank and account and your routing number for your emergency fund bank account. And then you can get it direct deposited or payroll deducted right out of your account, again, before anyone else can touch it. So you avoid having those goals combat each other. All right, so in this example, we're going to do 5%. Then, like I mentioned before, retirement is 15% if you can do that. But the caveat is 15% is the target, including your employer match. But then again, no one's told me, wow, I've saved too much from retirement. So the more the merrier in that regards. And then your third goal, if you have the reason why most of us are here, an education or a family goal. So if you open up, let's say, a 529 account, those 529 accounts actually have account and routing numbers associated with them as well. So you can make all three of these goals, set it up automatic, and get it deducted right out of your paycheck, again, before anyone else has the opportunity to touch it. All right, so now that we have, like I mentioned, those prioritized goals, your time frame that dictates your goals, and then a plan, this is a simple tactic, a framework, if you will, to keep you on track. So when you were sent the invitations to this and then the reminder earlier, there was a link to SRP's website with the budgeting worksheet. And this is what we call divide and conquer your financial life. So it's a 50, 30, 20 technique. And basically 50% of your fixed expenses, meaning rent or mortgage or insurance, that should be, those expenses should only be around 50%. And if you did complete this before the presentation today and realize, well, wow, that's a lot higher, my fixed expenses are a lot higher than 50% of my take-home pay, then it's never been a better time to refinance. So interest rates are so low, you can take advantage of refinancing and try to get you in a more appropriate range for this. And then 20% being your monthly semi-variable expenses, those change somewhat. And then 30% being your financial goals, if you can afford it. So this is the framework. Do what you have to keep it front of mind. Put it on your fridge if you must, but this is something that you can take home and refer back to if you find yourself getting off track. And lastly, I want to indicate the rule of thumb here: housing should not exceed 25 to 30% of your take-home pay. So again, if you find yourself in that situation, look to refinance. Okay, so let's talk about then college planning and recent trends that we should keep in mind that can have made college planning so difficult. So here are some trends. This is a little outdated. It's now along the lines of 1.6 trillion is in student debt. That's the national student debt. And if you want to think about it in terms of GDP, a percentage of our gross domestic product of the whole nation, it's around 5, and it was 5 and now getting close to 10%. So that's a staggering number. And it actually, student debt surpassed auto loan debt and credit card debt as overall national debt. So this is a problem, and it's affecting people. If you notice this fourth bullet down or fifth bullet down, most recent grads are moving back home with their parents. And that's because they have to. You know, $350 a month is your average student loan debt. Most people can't afford that, especially, you know, if they're still climbing up the ladder and getting those initial jobs after school. So point is here, you know, it's just that much harder to save if you don't have a plan. And these trends have made it a lot more difficult. Now, let's look at it in another perspective. So this is inflation explained since 1983. And if you notice, this is versus other expenses that might come up. And this might shock you because medical expenses, you may think, was a higher, it was inflating each year higher than tuition, but that's almost double. Tuition's almost increased double compared to medical expenses. So on average, 6.4% is how much annually tuition's increasing. So this is a huge issue, and unless you decide to invest some of your assets into college planning, then you're not going to get there just having it in a savings account, barely earning 1%. So you don't get paid to save anymore, you only get paid to invest. Now let's look at it differently. If you want to talk about dollars instead of percentages, this is let's break it down, a wild stat, because if you see here, the blue line is your 4-year private school. And the 4-year private school is currently, if you have a newborn and if things keep going the way they're going, it's going to be over $500,000 to pay for a 4-year private school. Incredible, unheard of, right? And then if you notice, the purple is the public school. So these trends are just making it that much harder to save for college. And here's the other thing. It's a double-edged sword. If you look at this slide, you see that, now this is from 2010 to 2008, annual college costs have increased on 14%, but then your debt, your financial aid has diminished by 11%. So it's a double-edged sword. You're getting less aid and expenses just keep escalating. So I know I've been a Debbie Downer a little bit, and let's talk about what would be ways to address this. But before that, the reason why 7 out of 10 college grads have student debt, it's because of that double-edged sword there. And those students say that they have trouble reaching their other financial goals. Clearly, 80% said that it's affecting their retirement account, their retirement savings. So, and then they also can't pay for other major expenses, or even 35% said their living expenses. So this is a real issue, and we have to proactively have a plan to address it. So how can we plan to address these college costs and trends? Well, here's some ways. We have these accounts available. 529 accounts are primarily that vehicle that you're going to invest in. Then you have Coverdell savings accounts, UTMA or UGMAs. Those are your custodial accounts, but these are some ways that you can combat it. But far and by large, 529 education savings plans will be that primary vehicle. So what is a 529, right? Well, a 529, like I said, is a college savings plan. Actually can be used for higher education or high school now, private school, but they're state-sponsored plans. So each plan has their own state. Each state has their own plan, and each state uses a different program manager and broker-dealer. So if you want to find out where your state is, what provider they use, you would go to savingforcollege.com. Now, here's the other thing. 529s also offer state tax deductions. Some states offer that. And here's an example. I'm located in the Northeast, so Massachusetts gave a few in the local area. Massachusetts gives a deduction of $2,000, but if you notice, New Hampshire does not. So some states offer it, some states don't, but they all offer tax-deferred growth potential. So you do potentially have that, money grow tax-deferred, and you don't have to pay taxes on it annually, just like your retirement plans. So here's a look at which states offer tax benefits and which don't. And some offer benefits, tax deductions, even if you invest in an out-of-state plan. So if you see the purple, these offer tax deductions to any, if you use any plan. So that's Arizona, Arkansas, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, and Pennsylvania. That's the minority. If you see the majority, though, are the gray, it's the light gray. Those are the states that offer potential tax benefits, but that's only if you invest in your in-state plan. All right. And then tax neutral states, the light blue, unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you use their in-state plan or out-of-state plan. Like I mentioned, New Hampshire does not offer a state tax deduction, period. So some states do, some states don't, and then some states give tax deductions no matter where you invest your 529. All right, so where do I get these 529s? If you did want to open one, you do have, this is for Massachusetts as an example, Fidelity is their provider. So you would contact Fidelity and you would ask them or go there to set up a 529 plan. And if you did want to find out who your primary broker dealer or provider is, that's where I said you go to savingforcollege.com/529 plans. So that's the website right there at the bottom. Okay, so 529 features. Now, if you get the paperwork and look to start opening a 529 plan, it's going to say participant. And you might not realize, because you are technically retirement plan participants in your 401k or retirement plan, what that might mean. But that just means that's the account owner. So they have trade access, they can update the beneficiary, they can update your address, whatever they want, but they are the owner of the account. Then you'll see beneficiary, and beneficiary is the minor. That's usually the student for whom the funds are intended. And the beneficiary can actually be changed. Let's say hypothetically, the initial beneficiary did not want to go to school. You can change it to anyone that they're related to. So you do have a lot of flexibility in case that does happen. You can also reallocate the account twice a year. So that means you can change your investments twice a year. There is a workaround, which if you change the beneficiary, you can then also change the allocation another time if you've already hit that limit. And this is the main point I want to make. It's a minimum impact on financial aid eligibility. So this is extremely important, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there with 529s on, well, if I own a 529, it will be counted against me for financial aid. That is just simply not true, because there's a formula, and if you could all please write this formula down, this will help you plan for college and understand your financial aid. So that formula is total college costs minus your expected family contribution equals your financial aid eligibility, right? And it begs the question, well, how do I reduce and how do I make my expected family contribution that lower so that I can increase my financial aid eligibility, right? So with a 529 account, they calculate those assets at 5.64% for financial aid on the FAFSA form. So here's an example. If you have $100,000 in a 529 and you're applying for financial aid, that expected family contribution amount will only be $5,640. Okay. Now that's versus, let's say you had a UTMA, a UGMA, or custodial account, right? Those accounts are under the social of the minor. And in this formula, it's calculated that 20% of those assets are included in your expected family contribution. So in that example before, if you had $100,000 saved in your custodial account, then $20,000 will be counted towards your expected family contribution, reducing your financial aid eligibility. All right, so I really want to highlight this. It's extremely important. And I believe there were a few misconceptions on this prior to discussing this. And then far and by large though, before we move on here, the biggest impact is going to be the annual income of you guys as the parents, because that ranges from 22% to 47%. All right. So in this example before, if you have $100,000 saved in your savings account, and that was earmarked to plan for college and save for college, if you were applying for financial aid, potentially almost half of that could be included in your expected family contribution. And more than 1/3 of people actually save for college this way. So that is not the most efficient or productive way. And also that's a taxable account each year too. So you do not get the benefit of tax deferred growth. All right, so let's move on to funding a 529. And I mentioned before, you can set up payroll deduction and have it taken out of your paycheck without anyone else getting a chance to touch that money beforehand. So that's, I believe, the best way to do it. But you can also set up, as you see here, periodic payments from your bank account, an ACH, electronic transfer. Some people do $50 a month or whatever the number is, but they can set that up that way. And here's another common misconception I'd say about 529s. People believe that, well, if I'm the account owner as the parent, I'm the only one that can put money into it. That's not the case either. Contributions can be made by anyone. Grandparents, uncles, friends, family, doesn't matter. It can be made by anyone, okay? So really want to emphasize that point. All they have to do is make out a check to wherever the institution is and send it on in. Now there are limits to funding a 529 without incurring a gift tax. And those limits are $15,000 per year per individual or per beneficiary. And if you are married and filed jointly, then you can save up to $30,000 a year, again, without incurring a gift tax. Now, if you wanted to superfund your 529, right, and you wanted to get a jump start on it, there is a way you can do that. And they offer a 5-year tax-free gift in a single year up to $75,000 if you are an individual. That's simply 15,000 times 5. And then $150,000 if you are a married couple, right? Same thing, 30,000 times 5. So they do offer that if you did want to get a jump start. Now I know we haven't really talked at all about investments within the 401k, within the 529. And those investments though are similar to your 401k because your 401k are designated with a menu. You have a menu of mutual funds, and same thing with your 529. You have a menu of mutual funds and also some funds of funds. And those funds of funds are considered usually the target date funds. And I don't know if you've seen those in your retirement plan before, but basically how those work is as the child gets closer to retirement, it dials down the risk for you. So you don't have to constantly reallocate the account. And hypothetically, if this coronavirus pandemic happened and your kid was going to college that next day, you know, you would have already been an appropriate allocation that would have reduced that downside risk potential. So those are very popular, and those are some of the investment options in your 529 account. Lastly, with 529s, we're going to review the withdrawal rules. And I equate 529s to Roth IRAs and also HSAs because they are sometimes triple tax advantaged, meaning if your state does offer a tax deduction, right, that's one tax benefit. Then you have the tax deferred growth, that's 2 benefits, and then you have the tax-free withdrawal for a qualified distribution. And here's on the slide, you can see some examples of what qualified distributions are. And that's why they are very efficient vehicles and primarily the most efficient vehicle for college savings. And one other misconception I'd like to point out too is withdrawals that are taken out that are not used for qualified distributions. A lot of people think, well, man, I'm gonna have to pay taxes on that, and I'm also gonna have to pay a 10% penalty. That is true, but it's true only on the earnings portion. You see here, only on the earnings portion of that will you be taxed at your ordinary income rate and a 10% penalty, not that overall balance. I really want to highlight that too, just in case hypothetically you cannot change the beneficiary to anyone and you need to take the money out for any alternative reason. All right, and like I mentioned, we'll briefly touch about Coverdell savings accounts, but these are very much being phased out by 529s, by and large because of the amount, contribution amount. You are limited, as you see here, to $2,000 a year per beneficiary, and that's simply just not enough to save for retirement with the current trends that are in this market environment. So the other thing that makes 529s a little bit more flexible is that you actually have to take out this money and use it by the time you're 30, as you can see in bullet point 2. So that's why these are really being phased out by 529 accounts. But here's another way that you can save: your UTMA, UGMA, or your custodial accounts. And your custodial accounts, those are your taxable accounts each year. They're under the name of the minor, and unfortunately, you have to change that over once they become of age. So these are not as efficient, as I mentioned before, because they get included as a higher percentage into your financial aid eligibility. So we're going to leave you with a simple plan, and that plan is set some goals, right? Set your goals, prioritize them by a time frame, take action, and then keep it up. And leave you with some homework too. If you hadn't yet completed that 50, 20, 30 budgeting sheet, you should look to complete that. Prioritize your family goals while also saving for retirement, because of course retirement's always looming. And really make a positive change. Take action today. And if you are not the one in your family that handles the finances, that's fine. By all means, request a consultation with SRP or sit with your significant other or whomever that person is. But I'm going to leave you with this. I'm going to challenge you to make that appointment, to schedule some time to actually sit down and dig through your statements and take action to ultimately save for your goals. Sarah, I'm going to leave that to you, and thank you everyone, appreciate your time.
Perfect, thank you so much, Zach. You did a great job. We did have a number of questions that came in, so if you can hold on with us, Zach, for a few more minutes, I'd love to pose a couple of these questions your way.
Sure.
Christian asked, what happens if we have more than one child? Should we create more than one, or should we open more than one 529 account?
Great question. I would, yes, because like we mentioned here, you do have some limits in terms of how much you can contribute if you per beneficiary. So that 15,000 amount as an individual that you can contribute, that is per beneficiary. So if you do have 2 kids, then I would open 2 separate 529 accounts, yes. And worst case scenario, if one of them does not go to school, then you can change that beneficiary to that other child. And then here's the other thing, you can roll that money over into that plan without any taxable implications. It's just move it over as it is. So yes, definitely I would open 2.
Okay, great. And then Zach, you touched on it briefly, but wanted to revisit it because I got a number of questions about this. If you create a 529 account and your child does not need it, they don't end up using it, can you explain what happens to the money if there's no other beneficiary in your life that you would want to direct those funds toward?
Yes, so that's where there's a common misconception that people think you're going to get taxed on that overall balance. Let's say you had $100,000 in your 529 plan and you've made $10,000 of earnings, right? you're actually only going to get taxed on those earnings, the $10,000 worth of earnings, and then also a 10% penalty on that. So you can take the money out, but just realize you will be taxed, but only on the earnings.
Okay. All right, perfect. And then we did have a request if you could kindly repeat the equation or the formula that you mentioned for financial aid eligibility. And just so everyone knows, I did put that in the chat feature, but if you just verbally want to repeat that for us, Zach, that would be great.
No problem. So that is total college costs per year, actually, minus your expected family contribution, EFC, equals your financial aid eligibility.
Okay. Perfect. So Beth posed an interesting question that you might have some commentary on. I know it's a bit of a hypothetical, and we're living in an ever-changing landscape legislatively and politically right now. But she asked if college or higher education becomes free or subsidized by the government, do you anticipate that excess 529 savings would be released and allowed to be used for non-educational spending without a penalty? I've heard that there's a risk in saving too much in case that happens. So what would you share with us on that piece, Zach?
That's a very interesting point. If that happens, then they're probably going to make some type of legislation or rule around that, like they've done, giving you some flexibility with releasing some funds from your 401k retirement plan account. There'll probably be a lot of flexibility in terms of maybe not having a 10% penalty on the earnings. This is a hypothetical, of course, but I would think that they would not penalize you for saving more in a 529 just because they're now offering free tuition.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's when having a crystal ball for all of us would come in handy, right? So there's one last question, and it's going back to the retirement savings hierarchy slide that you showed us toward the beginning, where Tammy wanted some clarification. Can't an HSA be used as an investment tool? When we're talking about saving both for retirement, for medical, and for college, how does that HSA come into play as far as investments are concerned?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I mean, HSAs are wonderful vehicles. If you are eligible and if you're in a high deductible plan, then I would want that 100% take advantage of that, because as you saw, inflation is rising for healthcare costs, maybe not to the extent that it is for education costs, but it is rising. So having that vehicle and having that set up, because you can invest in there as well, just like your 529 plans, then that's a phenomenal vehicle. And if you do have the ability to open an HSA, I would definitely recommend it, because like I mentioned, they are triple tax advantaged as well. You get a tax deduction up front, they grow tax deferred, and if you take it out for qualified expenses, medical expenses, it's tax free. So absolutely.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for just one more question. This is one that we got a couple times. Can I use a retirement account such as a Roth IRA instead of a 529 to save for college? And if so, what are the pros and cons around that?
See, that is a great question. I do hear that a lot. And to that question before, if you're worried about saving too much in a 529 with legislature, then yeah, you can save more in a Roth IRA if you'd like. But the thing is, the negatives to a for saving in a Roth is that when you take the money out, it might not be, first off, you'd have to take the money out before you are after you are 59 and a half. Otherwise, you're going to get a 10% penalty, even though you're allowed to take money out from a Roth IRA to pay for education expenses. So that's one. The other thing is too, it is going to significantly harm you in your financial aid eligibility, because when you take the money out of a Roth IRA, that's going to count towards your income. And that, remember that formula, the expected family contribution amount, it's going to be around 50%. So it's actually going to be counted as your student's income, and 50% of that will be counted in your expected family contribution. Now, there are some flexibilities around that. So if you wait until your junior year to take that money out, then you can avoid it, because there is a 2-year look back period for financial aid eligibility. So there are some strategies around using a Roth IRA, but unless you are proactive and understand the pros and cons about it, and consult a tax advisor too, you know, I would still save for a 520 in a 529 plan.
Okay,
Does that
perfect.
make sense?
It sure does. Yes. Thank you so much, Zach. And I think that we covered all the questions that came through during our session. So thanks to those who reached out with some really great questions. We just want to thank you, Zach, on behalf of all SRP. Thank you for presenting on this interesting topic today. And thank you all to all the participants who joined us. We appreciate you being here. Several of you did ask if this was being recorded. It is indeed. So as soon as our compliance department reviews our recording, we will be emailing it out later this week to all of you who registered for today's event. So please be on the lookout for that. As well, the next scheduled webinar in the 2020 SRP webinar series is on Tuesday, August 11th, and we are going to have SRP's very own 401k lady, as she is known, Jeannie Fisher, presenting on the topic of Roth 401k, which is always interesting. She's going to do a deep dive there to help us figure out whether Roth or traditional, or what combination of the two might make the most sense for us in our retirement savings accounts. So stay tuned for an invitation to that event in early August. Until then, thank you again so much for joining us, and be well.
Thank you, everyone.